From HanselMinutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 272, recorded live Thursday, June 23rd, 2011. Support for Hansel Minutes is provided by Telerik RAD Controls, the most comprehensive suite of components for Windows Forms and ASP.NET web applications. Online at www.telerik.com. In this episode, Scott talks with Microsoft security engineer Barry Dorrans about the current state of web security.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes, and today I am talking to Barry Dorrans, who is a security engineer on the information security team. Is that what that's called?
Information security tools team. So we're the people responsible for making sure people like you don't do naughty things on the Microsoft internal network.
A team of tools in information security.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You know those little annoying dialogues that pop up and tell you haven't BitLockered your machine yet and we're going to force you to do it? Yeah, that's the sort of thing we do.
Oh, that's irritating.
Yeah, I know. It's great. You know, I tell people what team I work in, and then you get glares, basically, from everybody.
And that really is the thing I wanted to talk about, is that do you think that security is not a culture that is kind of held by everyone because it's just not fun?
That's the cultural aspect of it is strange. So as you know, Microsoft have been rolling out the security development lifecycle internally. So that has built some sort of culture within the development process. But at the end of the day, a lot of people find security irritating. I mean, I get irritated every time I have to change my domain password because I have to come up with another one. I've already had the muscle memory for the previous one, and it has to have loads of, like uppercase, lowercase numbers, punctuation marks. And I understand the need for it, but I still find it irritating. So I don't know if it's certainly not fun, but then a lot of things in development aren't fun. You know, grinding out your business layers isn't fun for a lot of people, but it's necessary. But security is more of an irritant because it gets in the way. And it's supposed to get in the way. That's what it does. But people don't like things that get in the way. They sort of expect stuff to work. And I think the other problem is that you don't see the value of it until something's gone horribly wrong, and it's too late. In the same way that people didn't particularly see the value of unit testing for a long time. But as they were forced to do it, they started seeing the value of it, and then suddenly they all became big unit testing fans. And I hope that eventually security will sort of push that way, but everyone views it as a tax rather than an investment.
See, this is the thing. It's delayed gratification. It's the same thing that they say, eat well and exercise, and in 30 years you'll know if you did a good job. And in security, it's the same thing. Yes,
which is interesting because I got my cholesterol results last month, and yeah, it's strange. But the even worse thing about security is if you do a good job, you never see results. Your results are negatives. You don't get hacked. You don't leak information. You don't get embarrassed. So for your customers, they don't see something that's been delivered. They see a lack of something, which is a hard thing for some people to get their heads around. Although hopefully with the current rampant running of LulzSec and Citibank and all the rest of the big high-profile hacking cases recently, maybe companies and developers will start to think about it a little bit more. I can only hope.
Let's use this as an opportunity to back up, because you've just brought up two things, LulzSec and you've brought up Citibank. So start with LulzSec. What is that, and why would people who are listening to the show care?
Well, I don't know if they care, but they're the people who are claiming responsibility for hacking Sony and an awful lot of other things as well. Knocking the CIA website off the web, I think they claimed a few days ago. There's some argument over what they have and haven't done. It's part of the whole anonymous movement that seems to have grown out of 4chan and a bunch of other interesting sites on the internet. And these guys are now just organizing hacks on high-profile companies just to do it for the laugh, basically. So they're claiming responsibility for all the Sony leaks and the interesting information that has leaked out of that, things like passwords not actually being treated properly, being stored in plain text. So they just seem to be running rampant right now. All over lots of rather interesting corporate and government sites.
You said something. You said the anonymous movement. What is the anonymous movement? Because when someone goes and takes a word on the internet and decides to co-opt the word and make the word mean something that it doesn't, when you say anonymous, you're not just saying that no one knows who they are, but they've actually taken that word and made it mean they're the name of their group.
Okay, so I think, well, it's kind of hard to tell because they're very disorganized, although they're starting to put out press releases now, which is quite amusing. Anonymous is a term that seems to have grown out of the 4chan website. So 4chan is a kind of, I wouldn't say anarchist, but let's say unmoderated and rather strange bulletin board on the web. So people can't find out who you are on that unless you give it away, obviously, by putting your full name in. There's no moderation, there's no logs, there's nothing, and people just go on and start posting things. It sort of varies from the slightly seedier end of pictures through to hacks, exploits, generally strange stories, humor, jokes, whatever. But everyone on the board is anonymous. And what seems to have grown out of that was, first off, protests towards Scientology, of all things. So there are actual physical protests of people wearing the Guy Fawkes mask from V for Vendetta, protesting Scientology. And also what seems to have happened is we have this anonymous group of people that seem to have gotten together somehow that are now starting to attack, Sony and the rest of people. It seems to be because they were annoyed at people getting prosecuted for doing strange things to PlayStations and stuff like that. That seems to have been the motivation behind the Sony attack. But I'm just assuming here because you can't really tell because no one knows who they are.
And why is that? Why, if you're doing something in security and you're doing hacks like this, but the hacks are for some kind of good? I mean, I think hackers do things for two reasons. One, because it's fun and interesting and it's kind of badass to do those things, but also because they feel that they're bringing some new awareness to something that was not respected, like security. But why do they have to be anonymous? I mean, will they be arrested immediately? Is this some kind of info terrorism?
Yes, they will. I mean, at the minute, apparently yesterday, someone got arrested in the UK for being part of this group, but the group is saying, no, he's not actually part of us. And whilst what they're doing, you can argue, is not particularly destructive, and it's pointing out flaws, there are still laws against it. So, yeah, they're protecting their identity because they'll get prosecuted. Simple as that. And when they start going down and trying to take down Senate websites or the CIA or the FBI websites, yes, it's probably a good idea to be anonymous.
Do you have any sense if these are like 15-year-old Norwegian high school students, or are they 40-year-old Microsoft engineers, or all of the above?
I would guess probably that it's all of the above. I believe it was a 19-year-old that was arrested in the UK yesterday. But it's one of those things where we'll never know until someone gets exposed. But I don't think sometimes once you get the whole hacking thing into your blood, it doesn't go away as you get older. You're aware of this yourself. You don't ever want to stop developing. If you find something that you enjoy, you keep at it for all of your life.
Well, it's certainly a bit of a hobby to some folks, and it's something that people once they start that particular hobby, that becomes the thing that they do, and they spend a lot of time doing it. But
yeah, as long as you get fulfillment from it, why stop?
Exactly. So, what about those of us who aren't involved in any of this? How do we protect ourselves from something like this? What are some of the things that are the new generation of hacks that people are using? Are they classified in a certain way? And is there are these obvious things, or are these things that you wouldn't think are obvious that have just kind of come to the light?
From my point of view, they're obvious. Now, I realize I'm not coming at this from a point of view where I haven't thought about these things before. Certainly, all of the recent hacks, the Sony hack, Citibank, and everyone else seem to have been using things like SQL injection or cross-site request forgery or direct objects access, which are vulnerabilities that have been known about for years. Indeed, the way of hacking websites doesn't seem to have moved on a lot. We use one of about 3 or 4 common exploits, and lo and behold, eventually one of them will work on a site that you're trying to attack. And that may be just due to the fact that the developers that had written the site had no awareness of these things, so they didn't code around for them or code checks for them. But there's nothing new. There's a website called there's a security group called OWASP, and what they have is every few years they produce a list of the top 10 vulnerabilities on the web.
This is OWASP.
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 Yes, and I think it's OWASP.org. I will check this as I'm talking. I should know this offhand because I'm a member. Yes, it's OWASP.org. And so every couple of years they produce this nice document, and they have a wiki and a website that tries to educate developers about how to actually stop these vulnerabilities. They also have local chapters in various cities. So I know there's one in Seattle, there's one in London. I don't know if there's one down your way or not, to be honest. But you can turn up and you can go for free and listen to people talk about various security hacks. I know the Norwegian one last week actually talked about cold boot attacks on things like drive encryption. So I've got a photograph of someone that I met in Norway holding a laptop while someone pours liquid nitrogen onto it. So it's not necessarily web security topics, but it's general security topics, and it's all free.
Okay, so what are the classes of hacks, the typical kind of the top 5 that people are getting nailed with?
SQL injection, still, which is kind of strange. So we've known about SQL injection for years. We have various ways to mitigate against it, but SQL injection is still the main way to exploit websites.
And what is that?
It's kind of strange in that, are we doing a really bad job of educating people? Or is it just that people don't want to be educated or they don't know? It's kind of strange. So SQL injection is where you are concocting a SQL command string directly from untrusted input and then running that. And with various use of apostrophes and semicolons, you can change what the SQL command that you've created actually does. Anything from just bypassing login information and always returning true when you run a command to check whether a login is valid, to actually dropping tables.
Okay.
Which is great fun when you do it in a demo, and then you realize that you probably shouldn't have dropped the table as an example of SQL injection because you wanted to use that table to do some more demos. I've done that.
And the classic example of this is what we all did in the the mid-90s, which was, select star from books where title equals something from a text box. And you're effectively letting anyone at all go and take something from the web, from the text box, and concatenate it into the string. And at that point, they're off and they're doing what they want to do.
Exactly. And yet it's still, in 2010, 2011, that's still the number one flaw.
Interesting. Now, is that something that we see less when we use things like ORMs, object relational mappers, and Hibernate and Entity Framework?
Yes. It certainly, as long as the ORMs are properly coded, of course, you're passing off responsibility for being safe to the ORM at that point. So if the ORM is doing things in the right way, and I would hazard a guess that most of them, most if not all of the major ones are, otherwise we'd have heard about it by now, then you're going to be reasonably protected.
Mm-hmm. And does that mean when I say reasonably protected, do I not have to think about it anymore?
In certain circumstances, you do. It depends. So one of the ways of mitigating against SQL injection is to use stored procedures. But if you have there's a classic way of actually getting injection within stored procedures, because when people want to run a search, for example, they tend to concatenate a SQL string within the stored procedure. And so you're still vulnerable to concatenation errors there unless you construct the string in the right way and parameterize the search bits that are going into the string. So it's possible to write a stored procedure that is vulnerable to SQL injection.
Okay.
So it depends on the ORM. I know that a lot of people these days are now just using databases as a backing store. And all the logic for things like search and so on is done within the ORM. So you may be less vulnerable there. But if you've linked your ORM up to your stored procedures because you have a database administrator that doesn't allow you to run wild on tables, then sometimes stored procedures are vulnerable to injection.
This episode of Hansel Minutes is brought to you by Careers 2.0. Careers 2.0 is a new service by our friends at Stack Overflow. You're probably all familiar with Stack Overflow, the online Q&A resource dedicated specifically to programmers and programming-related topics. Well, the team at Stack Overflow created Careers 2.0 to provide you with access to great jobs and introduce you to a bunch of great companies that you might consider working for, even if you're not currently looking for a job. Think of Careers 2.0 as a programmer profile. It gives you a platform to show that you're awesome by featuring your proudest contributions to Stack Overflow, GitHub, SourceForge, Bitbucket, anything programming related. You can even add your favorite programming books from Amazon.com. Profiles on Careers 2.0 are free. They're easy to get started, especially by importing your LinkedIn profile. However, there's one catch. Profiles on Career 2.0 are invite only. They did this to keep out the spam and have a high-quality environment. Fortunately for you, as a Hansel Minutes listener, I've got your back. Head on over to careers.stackoverflow.com/HM to accept your invitation today. Once again, that's careers.stackoverflow.com/HM. I hope you like it. So where do I start if I want to make sure that I don't have a latent stored procedure or SQL injection issue?
Well, if you had latent stored procedures, it's just a matter of code review time, unfortunately. I don't think I've seen any scanning tools that will look at stored procedures. There are a bunch of automated scanning tools out there for attacking various websites, which will go through a bunch of attacks, and you may or may not get useful results out of them. It depends on the way your website works. It depends on the tool. Some are expensive, some are cheap. It's kind of hard to produce a generic solution to this, and I've not seen anything that scans SQL at all, unfortunately. They may well exist, and I'm sure we'll probably hear via email or comments if someone knows of one.
Okay, so that's one category, SQL injection. What's another?
The next one, because I've got the OWASP top 10 list in front of me now, is the second most popular is cross-site scripting.
All right.
So this is where we take in, again, untrusted input, so things from text boxes or from parameters, query string parameters or HTTP headers or all sorts of other stuff, and we directly output it without sanitizing it. So that varies from things like just popping up an alert box with a rude message to redirecting the browser to offensive websites like, say, Justin Bieber's homepage or something like that, to full-blown, we have complete access to the DOM on the website, so let's change some of the text subtly so a stock price would be manipulated on screen, or we steal browser cookies, which may allow session hijacking. So if the bad person gets the cookies, they recreate them on their machine, and then maybe, if they're lucky, they will be authenticated as you.
So this is session hijacking is literally you become them, and for the moment you're logged in as them. You may or may not know their password, but it doesn't really matter because you are them. It
depends a lot on how websites implement sessions, but some websites implement session with a simple cookie that is not protected. So if you just recreate that cookie and browse the same website, then suddenly you're that person.
Mm. Okay. And you can solve that in a number of ways. Like, for example, I've seen when I worked in banking that, you can do the best you can to mitigate people doing session hijacking, but you can one perspective, and I'm interested in what you think, is that assume that they will get hijack your session.
Yeah.
Assume that no matter what you do, they're still going to get in. And then think about things like, well, if they are in, if I have a stranger looking at my stuff, looking at my banking, have I X'd out social security numbers? Have I X'd out account numbers? And by that, I mean not Xing them out once they get to the client, but I mean literally they never showed up at the client complete. And if I try to go and transfer money, then I would authenticate them again. So we actually had levels of authentication where you were kind of lightly or typically authenticated. And then when it comes time to transfer money from one account to another, you authenticate them one more time by asking them their mother's maiden name and things like that.
Yeah, and that's currently the way my U.S. bank seems to do things. The actual asking for authentication again is another interesting one because that stops some cross-site request forgery attacks, which is where an attacker can create a form that basically mirrors what's in your bank form and submit it on your behalf. So there have been a bunch of interesting, well-known attacks. A bunch of guys from Princeton did it on some banking websites a few years ago as a research project, and discovered that certain banks would allow you to just basically submit a form, and because the attacker would create the form, get a user to browse to that form. And because the user was already authenticated at the bank, when the form was submitted, it redirects the browser to the bank website. The bank website goes, you're already authenticated, so I'll do what you want. And you could transfer money from one account to another. But by adding an extra step saying, now you must type in another password, that is one mitigation against cross-site request forgery.
So is that bad to assume that you're going to get nailed anyway?
I don't believe so. Of course, it makes you horrendously paranoid, but that's my natural state. I think it's probably a good idea. So I know when we develop things internally, you have the whole threat modeling process where you look at all your flows, you look at the concept of trust boundaries, where untrusted input goes into your system, and how you make it trusted. And you're looking at possible attacks on your software, on the process. And then you model those attacks, and then you take mitigation steps. So people should be assuming that something is going to go horribly wrong at some point. And it's not just a matter of threat mitigation and trying to fend everybody off. There's also, well, what do you do if that doesn't work? How do you cope with it when things go wrong?
Talk a little bit about the idea of threat modeling. And then threat mitigation is kind of what we just described, which is you're going to get nailed. What are you going to do about it?
Yes. So probably the best resource for the concept of threat modeling is Michael Howard and Steve Littner's book, which I'm reaching up to my bookshelf to get, which is called... no, that's the wrong one. Hold on. Next one.
You're the first guest who's actually, I can hear you moving around in the background and walking around during the podcast.
Sorry, I'm not walking around. I'm sliding around in my chair. So I have the threat modeling book in front of me, which is by Microsoft Press and is by Wendell Snyder, who now I believe works for Apple, and Frank. I can't pronounce his surname. That's bad. Swiderski. I'm not entirely sure. And this sort of takes you through the threat modeling process, which again is part of the Microsoft SDL. So if you go to the Microsoft SDL website, you can actually download a threat modeling tool, which allows you to draw diagrams of your systems in Visio, and then draw the trust boundaries where untrusted input comes in. And then it will prompt you for various threats. And you can fill in the threats, and you can brainstorm how these things could be exploited, and then you can create mitigations against them. And then you shove those in TFS or whatever your bug reporting system is going to be, and you keep them as bugs until you've mitigated them so you don't forget it. There's another interesting thing, which is escalation of privilege, which is a card game that Adam Shostak came up with. Because threat modeling can be hard. You don't necessarily think about all the things, or if you don't have experience with it, it can take a long time. So there's a card game where you just basically play it like trumps, and you throw down all the threats. Okay. And as you throw the cards down, they're described, so you can look at the description and you can think about it and model around it like that. And the card deck, again, is available for free as a download on the Microsoft SDL site, and you can print out the cards and cut them up and then have a bit of fun doing it that way.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, because that might sound silly to a number of people. They might think, oh, really? Okay, I'm going to solve security problems with card decks. But it sounds a lot like planning poker, which is a popular kind of agile way to get a large group of people and to collect their kind of their larger knowledge, take advantage of groupthink, and get people thinking about, in the case of planning poker, thinking about planning. But it sounds like you can do similar things with security.
Yeah, I guess it sounds a little bit strange to people, but the SDL team actually printed out physical boxes of cards and took them to RSA last year. So they had an awful lot of them. And RSA is a big security conference, and I think within the first day, all the packs of cards had gone. So even people who are doing security on a professional basis actually thought it was really useful, and then took the physical cards. I didn't get a pack. I was kind of hoping that Adam would have some left, but no.
So not a solution, but certainly an interesting tool. What?
Well, the only solution you have is experience in this sort of thing. Unfortunately, the more you do it, the more you start thinking of various ways that your system may be insecure. I'm not saying that you will ever learn to think like an attacker, which is a common phrase. It's not a phrase that I like, because that's like giving someone a set of professional chef's knives and saying, now think like a chef. That's not how people work. Mm-hmm. But it will give you knowledge of all the common flaws and a framework with which to describe them and classify them, and then you can look at taking mitigations towards them.
Okay. What tools are available that are external that people who are working in the Microsoft space can take advantage of? What kind of scanning tools, tools that will attack, whether they be Microsoft tools or free tools that we can use to see, like we could run after this podcast to see if one of my websites is in trouble?
We as in Microsoft do not produce a web scanning tool. We have a bunch of partners that do, and now I'm trying to remember who they are and which ones we actually use internally. It's very hard for me to make recommendations on this, because they all have costs associated with them, and it's quite different depending on your circumstances. I know one of the more popular ones is something called Burp Suite, and I can't remember who it's by, unfortunately. And that does a bunch of automated scanning bits and pieces against websites. The problem you have with automated scanning tools is that either A, they give a lot of false positives, and then developers don't trust the results, or B, they don't detect something and developers do trust the results. There's nothing that's 100% accurate. Nothing will ever promise to be 100% accurate. If you are looking at tools online and they say we have no false positives and we're 100% accurate, I would be very suspicious of that tool. So they're interesting, and I think they're useful, but they're not something that can be relied upon as your only way of trying to detect security flaws. Okay. You have to code review. You have to threat model. You have to look at the boundaries between untrusted input and into your system and take appropriate steps there. And code review at the end of the day is pretty much the only way to do it. Even then, of course, as you know, you can overlook things in code review. So nothing's ever going to be 100% accurate or make you 100% safe, except for unplugging your web server from the internet.
What about the Microsoft Code Analysis tool? They called it cat.net. It was very popular around 2008, 2009, and we haven't heard a lot from it since.
So cat.net does detect, it actually does detect some SQL injection stuff. And code analysis is interesting. There's also some security rules that are plugins for FXCOP that someone did internally, Sasha Faust, Faust, and I believe they're either on Codeplex or on his blog, and you can plug those into FXCop and run them as part of your code analysis stuff. Cat.net, again, does look for flow between untrusted input into things where it shouldn't be detecting it. And like everything else, it will have false positives, or it may indeed miss stuff because code analysis is hard. FXCop takes a slightly simpler approach, and it looks at methods and classes that are isolated. Cat.net tries to follow the flow of input all the way down and then back up again, which is a difficult problem to solve. It used some technology that came out of Microsoft Research, which gives you an idea of how incredibly difficult a problem it is to solve, because the Microsoft Research people have great big huge throbbing brains with which they can move coffee cups on their desks. So if we have to take technology from them, then it's because we can't work it out ourselves.
But that problem, the idea of following the inputs all the way and then following the output all the way back, that is the kind of things that you do in a code review. And when you say a code review, you're literally talking about get a bunch of smart people in a room and moderate the process and have them step through the code at all of the points of danger. So you model the threats, you stack rank the threats, and then you try to get as many people as you can to look at that code and then formally walk through and say, all right, the text box comes in here. What is the state of the data at this point? Has it been encoded or not? What form has it been encoded? What do we know about the encoding process? And you just go up through the whole thing.
Yes, and that's basically what you're going to have to do if you want to reassure yourself that things are safe.
Or you wait until you get nailed.
Here. The tools help automate it, and they may highlight some things that are low-hanging fruit, or any of the other phrases that you care to use, but they may not catch everything. Over-reliance on tools as opposed to proper code reviews and examining your code is probably dangerous.
Cool. Do you have in conclusion, do you have a suggested, I don't know, what's the slashdot of security? What's the place, the one website to visit, or the one or two websites I should visit each day if I'm interested in security?
No, I don't actually. What I find interesting right now is Twitter is probably a good resource. So you follow various security folks on Twitter. It's hard. So security, it can be quite platform specific. If you're interested in one thing, you may not be interested in another. You may not have smart cards in your environment, so you don't care about smart cards getting hacked. You may not worry about cold boot attacks on TPM encrypted laptops, that sort of thing. I think trying to find an expert and following that, Bruce Snyder's blog is interesting, sometimes very, very low level, sometimes very, very high level. The OWASP site is obviously useful, but it's a more of a reference, in the same way that the SDL blogs from people like Adam Shostak and so on are more of a reference. I don't think I could give you an easy answer to that one. I'd have to go think. I don't check that many. I just follow people on Twitter, and they point out interesting things.
That's the interesting thing about Twitter. You're basically leaning on the collective to do the work of finding these things, of aggregating this stuff for you.
Well, you get individuals that will point out something that is interesting, and then you're doing the aggregation work because you're following those interesting individuals. Mm-hmm. I find I don't actually read a lot of blogs anymore since I've got more and more active on Twitter.
All right. Well, where can folks follow you on Twitter?
Oh, really? You want to recommend my Twitter? You've seen my Twitter account. It's generally me insulting people. However, right, if that's what you want to hear, and there may be the odd interesting security nugget, you can follow me on Twitter at blowdart.
I so knew that this was a mistake.
Yeah, that's probably not wise. My blog is, whilst quiet, every now and again I will pop up and I will actually do something interesting and useful about security. Right. And that's at idano.org. So that's probably a better resource if you don't want to deal with the noise of me interacting with all the folks in the UK that I left behind a year and a half ago, which is generally what my Twitter feed consists of.
All right. Well, we'll hear from the audience or whether or not they thought this was a valuable thing or not.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure I want to know.
All right, cool. Thanks so much, Barry, for talking to us today about security.
No problem. Thanks, Scott.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.